Hey guys, Modest Major here. Today I wanted to bring you a commentary talking about kind of starting with Capcom and then leading that into discussion about Nintendo. That's been on my mind. Nintendo are always hot on my mind. A lot of their decisions are very polarizing. A lot of their decisions, they have some incredibly standout moments and then some incredibly what is going on at Nintendo sort of moments. And it doesn't seem to be too much in between. They're either peaking or they're flatlining. Um, but I kind of wanted to start this discussion with talking about Resident Evil 4 remake trailer that just dropped. Or I saw it last night. I'm not exactly sure when it dropped. I think it dropped last night, but I couldn't be completely sure. And really, I was completely blown away with how high quality this trailer looked. They really managed to transition a lot of the best aspects of the old Resident Evil 4 formula whilst injecting a bit more horror, injecting a bit more tension. You see a bit of what they've learned from Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil The Village. You see a lot of that, they've kind of looked at games like Outlast, I feel like, and looked at games like Amnesia, let's say, where are these more like experience horror games where you're kind of walking through. And I think they've tried to take good aspects from that whilst also retaining the combat formula that is so successful in Resident Evil. And as a result, Capcom have been having a massive resurgence. I mean, to go back a while, I was never really too fond of Capcom as a company. I never really got into the old Mega Mans. I enjoyed Dead Rising 1, then I remember the sequels to it I thought were like massively disappointing. I kind of thought that Street Fighter was going downhill. I was, kind of considering getting into Street Fighter, and then Street Fighter 5 came out and it just didn't look that great. And a lot of people would have said Third Strike is where they peaked, or at worst, Ultra Street Fighter 4. But definitely Street Fighter 5 seemed like a step in the wrong direction. Then Monster Hunter for a while, it never really got its claws into me. And then Resident Evil 5 was another game that kind of came out and was a bit disappointing. And to me, I always thought Capcom were kind of like a Konami or a Ubisoft, let's say, where it's a company that's kind of going a bit too corporate. It's a company that's going to be on the way out if they don't change something in a massive way. And then all of a sudden we get games like Monster Hunter World, which I think is one of the most revolutionary, groundbreaking games. Just in terms of production value, I think it set a new bar for what production values were capable of in video games. Then you've got games like Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I thought was an incredible return to form. Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard to me was the start of the right direction, and then Village was then kind of putting the icing on the cake, saying, look, we are back with this Resident Evil, and this is more of a full-fledged game. If anything, 7 felt like just the first step. And then 8 or Village, they kind of cemented that. And then Street Fighter 6 is on the horizon and looks really good. You've got Devil May Cry 5. But mostly I want to talk about, as they're doing well on a whole, the bit I want to hone in on more is how good they are at their remakes. Their remake game is untouchable. I think it's one of the best in the industry right now in terms of doing stuff that can appease as many old school fans as possible. We've also got Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII may have been a bit more divisive just because the original was so classic RPG that no matter what you were going to do with it, it was probably going to be pretty drastically different. But I still think it, captured a huge audience and did really well critically, commercially, etc. It did great. But Resident Evil is more like a standout in terms of, I think there's very few people who would play 2 Remake and be like, this is just flat out worse in every way. There's clearly a lot going for the Resident Evil 2 Remake. And there's clearly, I think, a lot going for the Resident Evil 4. I mean, just looking at the comments and looking at the feedback and the response from outlets and journalistic outlets, etc., people seem crazy hype about 4, and to be honest, so do I. I was blown away. And it kind of leads me to want to segue to, you might have already guessed it by now, but what Nintendo are doing with their remakes, what Nintendo do with their old content, and how I think it's just completely out of touch, it's completely whack in terms of what they could be doing with a lot of their old franchises and what they choose to do instead, and how they've, quite frankly, just been dropping the ball completely, I think, and just not capitalizing upon something they could do. Now, obviously, Nintendo, their new titles are thriving. They come out, they're great. I can't really fault them as a company altogether because, unfortunately, they're making money, they're doing well, they're commercially successful. But it's annoying when you think, of Ocarina of Time. Let's say they put that same treatment of Resident Evil 4. You ball in with Ocarina of Time. You bleed a bit more atmosphere in it. You bleed a bit more higher performance specs. You bleed a little bit more. And there's just so much they could lean into. The game's atmosphere is obvious, it's dripping, and N64 is now a piece of hardware that people don't want to touch it, man. They don't want to play with an old N64 controllers. They don't want to experience the old style of graphics. They don't want to experience the jankiness, the bugs, the combat mechanics. There's so much that Ocarina of Time are missing. And some people could say, well, they did do Ocarina of Time HD on DS and Majora's Mask, but these are minimalist compared to what Capcom are achieving. They are nothing. Majora's Mask in particular, they made mistakes on. They made mechanics that take away from what the original game was. For example, like the Deku Shrub that you could turn into a Majora's Mask. It's not actually capable of the same level of movement as in the original game. So there's actually areas that become nigh impossible to clear because, and like bonus areas that are harder to get to because your jump doesn't perform the same. Little oversights like that, and then you look at Capcom with every little bit of attention to detail and, time investment that the developers must have spent bringing everything to life, looking back on the old and saying, what should we take, what shouldn't we take, and just having this, what feels like a handcrafted formula. And it just leaves me wondering what is there to lose by dumping a bunch of money into this old, you've got stuff like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, even Twilight Princess. You could update these. You could take these to a new level, and instead of just doing like a HD port, which feels lazy, and more often than not, has one or two problems. And the other issue is, the hardware is just getting ridiculous. When the Switch released, we knew that it was behind the times. We knew it was about on par with an Xbox 360, right? But that's at the start of a generation. When you get to the end of a generation, which it feels like is being stretched out, even more now, no mention of a Switch Pro, no mention of a new piece of hardware. It just feels like we're living in the past with some of these titles. And when you think about what's graphically capable, kind of bridging off from remakes, even looking at Pokemon, you could definitely remake some of the old Pokemon stuff and make it look incredible. Was Let's Go Eevee, again, it's like a basic minimalist take on so many of these old games where there's so much they could be bringing to life, so much they could be capitalizing on. And some people say, well, they won't do it because, the old Switch, and, maybe people wouldn't want to pay more for extra hardware. I'm sorry, but if you came out with a Nintendo Switch that had, significantly better hardware, and with remakes close to the caliber, I'm not going to say on the caliber of Capcom, because if they are the best, it is, of course, going to be hard to reach the best degree of remakes possible. Maybe, even if you say they're not capable of making to that degree, if you make it to a degree where it captures upon the nostalgia very well on Ocarina of Time, it produces graphics and an experience that is, clearly next gen in terms of not just the, modern day design philosophies, but in terms of the graphical fidelity and aesthetic as well, that's a game that is going to print money. That's a game that is going to sell systems. It's not a question. Of course they're going to do it. Nintendo fans could try and hold out a little bit, but they're going to get bled out if they see things like a Mario 64 update in something like an Unreal Engine. Now, I'm not saying they're going to use Unreal Engine because Japanese companies, Nintendo, they don't really like messing with Unreal, it feels. But at the end of the day, it's just frustrating to see opportunities missed out time and time again. And I always take the stance, you know, when it comes to game development, I am, of course, a game development noob. You know, I'm not someone who has any skills in game development. I'm not someone who has credentials or anything like that. But I think it's frustrating when, as a fan, you can look at something and go, well, if I was in a boardroom with some of these people, and if it could be translated, let's say English to Japanese, etc., and I could say like 5 things that they should be doing that would obviously make them money, that would obviously be a better direction for the company to take in the respect of HD remakes, in the respect of certain things. It is infuriating to be a fan of something and it be that obvious to someone who's just an outside fan, and for some reason they don't want to print money. It's a mutually beneficial thing. Look how much people are eating up these Resident Evil remakes. To be truthful with you, I didn't even like old Resident Evil. I never got into Resident Evil. Like I said, I was not a Capcom fan. So it wasn't like I was going into these like, oh my god, thank god they've, remade Capcom games and they've remade Resident Evil. For me, it was a jumpstart into that experience. And how many people are going to get the exact same with Ocarina of Time? Do you know how many people I talk to about Ocarina of Time and they say, nah, I just couldn't get into it. Why couldn't you get into it? The movement mechanics, the camera, the graphics just look too dated, etc., etc. Just feels too old. It's past its prime. It was probably good for its time. How much do you hear this stuff? But there's so many philosophies of Ocarina of Time and so many story beats, characters, characterizations, atmosphere, depth, that would completely convert into the new age and just needs to be given a fresh coat of paint, fresh mechanics, and, honestly, I don't think there's that much to it. And it would be printing money into that much to it in terms of like design ideologies. I don't think they need to bring that much to the table. And maybe they have this attitude of, oh, we don't want to be late. We don't just want to milk our franchises. I think it comes down to that. Oh, we'll save that for like a plan C, if so, maybe they're saving it for when Nintendo's like, golden age starts to end. But I just think that's complete rubbish. I mean, they've got so many games in their franchise. They could do this forever and ever. They've got Pokemon series. They've got Mario series. They've got Zelda series. They've got F-Zero series. They've got so many games they could do this with. And it would be an absolute like godsend to the fans, to the industry, and I just don't get why they're not doing it, and it drives me insane. And I feel like Capcom are gonna have like the most memorable 2023, 2022, and Nintendo could just as easily be capitalizing on it. And don't get me wrong, I think Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be a banger game. Could it have been better if it was on new hardware? Absolutely. Do I think the Pokemon games are going to be tragically bad? Yeah, it might not necessarily be all Pokemon's fault, but it doesn't help that they are developing on old, outdated hardware by now. That definitely can't help them as developers. They don't have new tech and new stuff to be working with. And then, it's just kind of waiting on these long, long, long releases, and something that would really keep people going and keep people hyped on Nintendo and gaming, and it would build and bolster the franchise and bring people back. Like I said, I think some of the old Zeldas and some of the old Marios offered something that the new ones don't, and I think a lot of people don't know, they can't even put it to words what they're missing out on, and like the old people can't quite characterize to the new fans exactly what they missed out on, and I think it's sad. I don't want to see history go to waste for no reason other than like what seems like negligence, just seems like avoidance of the topic, and I have no idea why. And I think Capcom are showing more than ever, they're just demonstrating it. Like, this is what you could be doing. This is the piece of the pie you are missing out on. But anyway, I've been Modest Major. Hope you guys enjoyed this little rant. Peace out.